everybody, it's Webs here, and in true Blizzard fashion, we got leaks of the announcement a day before the announcement actually happened. I'm going to divide the new information into two videos, one for Mercenaries, one for Standard/Wild, even though I don't really talk about Wild. And if you want to hear about Battlegrounds, let me know, because then maybe I'll do a video on that on like Saturday or Sunday, really depends. And for now, I'm going to just go off of the data mined information, and if anything changes between the time I upload this video and time of recording, I'll go back and actually include the updated information, because I'd rather take the chances of this actually being false information and having to re-record some segments and having to re-record the entire video. But I very much doubt that any of this information is going to change. Maybe we'll see an additional nerf or so. And because of this, I probably won't do a regular style mercenary video for Friday. I'm sorry, but there's just so much information that's coming out, and I'd rather focus on these two videos instead of trying to push out another mercenary video this week too. Though there are still chances that I might do one on Saturday or Sunday, just depending on how I feel, to be honest. So with all that out of the way, let's look over the buffs and nerfs that are going to be in the game next week. The first card getting changed is Sorcerer's Apprentice, which is a wild nerf, and they are increasing her cost from a 2-cost minion to a 4-cost minion. My understanding, the change to this card is because of Drekthar, as he allows you to actually cheat these out of the deck pretty quickly, and that deck can actually do a bunch of damage in one turn. So I'm assuming that's the reason why this card is actually seeing changes. I don't know how relevant that deck is actually in Wild, just because of the fact I don't really play it that often, but I do think it's probably an overall healthy change for the game, just because of the fact that if you change this card to be 4-cost instead of 3-cost, then you can't run them in the same deck as Drekthar, and this card was always going to be one of those cards that is a borderline problematic card, as it discounts the cost of spells by 1, and it doesn't have a minimal cap of 1. And while I am kind of sad to see a change like this go in place, I do understand the reasons behind it, as it will serve as a problematic card for now and into the future, and I very much doubt people won't find ways to still abuse this even after the whole Drekthar deck. Alright, so the second nerf that actually got revealed today is another wild change. The card in question is Rapid Fire, which got its cost increased by 1 and its damage increased by 1. Before, I don't really play Wild that much, so I can only make assumptions of why this card is getting nerfed and go by what I'm seeing online, which this change is meant to target Odd Hunter, and that makes a lot of sense. Why else would you want to change the cost and the damage of this card, since this doesn't seem like a real big nerf? Though if this card was being abused in Odd Hunter a lot, that makes a lot of sense. It does completely make Arcane Shot a useless card, just because of the fact this is basically 2 Arcane Shots in the price of 1 card. But overall, I think this is probably a decent enough change. Alright, time for some changes that I can actually talk about and actually have some knowledge about. So Incanter's Flow's cost is being increased to 4, up from 3. This is the second time we've actually seen this card get an increase in its costs, and I don't think this will make people not want to run the card in any type of deck. This nerf is probably mainly for Mozaki Mage, just because they want to tone down some of the OTKs that can actually happen, but I still don't think this is enough to actually kill the card, even in that deck, because you're going to want to still be able to discount all the cards in your deck so you can just go infinite with Mozaki anyways. So increasing its cost might not do that much. It's a repeat offender similar to Ruined Mithril Rod, which keeps getting nerfed, and that card, sure, it's dropped in popularity, but is still used in some decks, as it is still a very powerful card. Overall, I think this is a decent nerf, but I still don't think it's going to kill the card. The only way you could kill the card is to make it where the spells can't be reduced below 1 cost, and that would be a great way to actually make a change to this card, but I don't see Blizzard ever doing it, and if they did, they would probably unnerf its mana cost, to be honest. The only good news is it's going to be rotating out soon, so we won't have to deal with it that much longer in Standard. Alright, so the second nerf to Standard is to the questline for Warrior, which actually demonstrates the issue with some of these infinitely resource generating questlines that are in Standard currently. The change to this questline is to increase the amount of pirates needed for the second step to 3 instead of 2, which should put it in line with some of the other questlines that are in standard right now, which should be a good thing overall for the game, though like I said before, it does demonstrate the issues that some of these questlines do have when they generate an infinite amount of resources that you can't actually stop your opponent from accessing if you're playing against them. And while some of these permanent buffs aren't as devastating as the ones for Warrior or Warlock, they do demonstrate a issue with Hearthstone balancing, and I hope Blizzard actually learns from these for the future, because it did introduce a lot of power creep, which is something that I am always worried about whenever it comes to a card game. At least we do have a rotation to actually make the power creep a lot slower than some of the other card games out there. But overall, I don't think this kills the card. I think it just makes it a little bit slower and makes it a well-rounded deck where it's a lot healthier for the game in this state than it was previously, and I'm looking forward to the change. Alright, so this next nerf should shock no one, which is to Shadowcrafter Scabbs, increasing his cost by 1. I'm honestly not too shocked about this card at all, just because when it got revealed, I thought it would be really powerful just because of the fact it is a AoE board clear for Rogue, which the class hasn't really had since Vanish rotated out. It also does generate 2 minions that could be really deadly for your opponent to deal with, especially because they have stealth, and his hero power is just insane. I'm shocked that they didn't go a little bit further by making his cost 9 instead of 8, but this does allow it to actually still be played, and I very much doubt this will actually make the card not playable. It's just such a neat card, and it doesn't have any other replacements that you could fit in Rogue unless you're doing something like I did with Death Rattles and Explosive Sheep. And this change does help out some of the minion-based aggro decks that might be floating around, just because of the fact that it will help the Rogue matchup by a lot. And Rogue still has a bunch of ways to actually just OTK your opponent pretty easily. So the only sad thing about this nerf is while it hits all the OTK Rogue decks, it also hits all the gimmicky Rogue decks that exist out there too, which is kind of sad, but I think it's probably healthy for the game that this card got a little bit of a nerf. Wildpaw Gnoll is actually the card that probably got the biggest nerf out of all these cards, which is a increase to his cost by 1 and a decrease in his attack by 1. The reason for this nerf is actually quite simple. Cute Rogue and Thief Rogue are both really powerful right now. If you start with this card in your opening hand when you're transformed by Maestra, the interaction between those two cards is kind of interesting, where it'll discount this card in particular by 1 for every Rogue card that you actually draw into. And if you draw into a secret passage, you can instantly make this cost 0, which is why this is actually seeing the change. And this will probably delay the card by 1 turn, though I don't think this is a big enough nerf to actually kill the card. None of these nerfs seem to be big enough to actually kill any of the cards, besides maybe the next one. And while I'm not the biggest fan of aggro, I do think this will allow some aggro decks that aren't really being played right now to see some playability, which is actually a pretty good change overall for the health of the game, as it will make a more diverse meta. The final nerf that we're seeing is to Cloak of Shadows, increasing its cost by 1. So as a person who likes to play a lot of gimmicky decks, I am sad to see this card actually get nerfed, but at the same time, after facing a bunch of weapon rogues or Groot rogues that make it where you can't actually target their hero for a turn, I am actually pretty glad that this card is seeing some type of change, just because of the fact that once people realize this card is actually really decent in a lot of these OTK strategy decks, it saw a lot more play outside of the gimmicky decks where it originally belonged, and made for a very frustrating metagame when you were facing a deck that otherwise you would win, but they stealth themselves for a turn just so they can OTK you with a big wombo combo turn the next turn, and then wombo combo into a second Cloak of Shadows if they didn't kill you off in that turn. Basically, this card acts as a pseudo ice block for Rogue, which is always going to be a problematic thing just because of the fact that Rogue always has some type of weird wacky combo that they can actually pull off pretty consistently, and Rogue currently has 2 of those, Groot Rogue and Poison Rogue, neither of which are really fun to play against whenever they get their combo off, and I am very glad for this change overall. But sadly, I do not think this is a big enough change for them not to run at least 1 copy of this, just because of the fact that Being able to make your hero untargetable for a turn is just an insane ability, and people have finally realized the potential of this card, which makes me happy inside, but at the same time, kind of depressed because it isn't a fun card to play against. The final change is actually a buff instead of a nerf, which is to the warrior hero card of Rokara, increasing the armor you gain when you play her to 10 instead of 5. And this honestly makes a lot of sense from a balancing perspective, just because of the fact that you're going to hit a minion with the weapon that you equip with her. And you do want to have some armor so you don't take a bunch of damage, which is the main issue with the card currently standing. It does give me a lot of hope for a control style warrior deck to actually appear, though I know those decks can be a little bit frustrating to play against. It's been a deck that's been in Hearthstone's history for so long, and it's kind of weird to actually be in a moment where Control Warrior isn't that strong compared to its questline variant. And it does seem like a deck that Blizzard was actually trying to push with the Alterac set. Though I don't know how relevant this is going to be as it currently stands, just because of how quick some of the OTK decks actually are. Though, given the fact that we did get a bunch of frost spells in Warrior, that all are basically control tools, but no minions that actually rely on frost spells within Warrior, I'm assuming for the mini set we'll see some additional support for the deck, and I'm really hopeful for the future of a deck like this, just because of the fact that it should be a lot of fun to actually try to make work. So those were all the changes announced for Hearthstone Standard and Wild, and I know I don't really talk about Wild, but I wanted to give the chance to actually talk about these two nerfs just because they were announced on the same day. And I know Hearthstone's other game modes actually got a bunch of news too that was data mined, though I don't really cover battlegrounds or duels on this channel. But if you want me to cover the news on those game modes too, let me know on the comment section down below, because unlike Wild, I actually know a little bit what I'm talking about when it comes to battlegrounds. So that could be actually an interesting subject to actually talk about. Either way, the mercenary news should be tomorrow, as I should have enough time to actually record and edit it by the time that I usually upload videos. And while I don't think any of these nerfs, at least for standard, will actually kill any of these cards, I do think these are overall good changes for the health of the game, as it should slow down some of the OTK decks that are in standard as it currently stands, and slow down some of the infinite resource generation of some of the other decks in the game. And like always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, bye bye.